USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Spotlight for Wednesday, February 7th, 2024. This podcast is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at XL Energy Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. Visit ncaa.com/mfrozen4 to get your tickets today. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. And Jim, every year we talk about how important it is for fans to really understand what's going on the ice with officials and officiating, rules, and video.
And joining us this week on USCHO Spotlight, he's the head referee in chief, we'll call him, from the Big Ten Conference. He's the former NCAA rules secretary as well, Steve Piotrowski. Great to see you, Pi. Always good this time of year to kind of catch up, particularly in a year like this where there's going to be some rule changes coming. But we'll talk a little bit about officiating, what you're seeing on the ice, and maybe get into a little bit more. But just right off the hop, I guess referees are always under the microscope from October to April, but it does feel as we get into these league races, we're coming down the stretch. They're more scrutinized, more criticized than ever. What are you seeing these days, especially in your league, with the officials and coaches, and how the reactions go, and how difficult has your job been, in recent weeks and months?
Yeah, I mean, nothing's changed year over year, other than the dates, right? So as we get to the end of the year, and particularly what's noted this year is everything's so close, guys. The standings are close, and each game is very important, not only from a conference perspective, but from a national perspective in national rankings. So the scrutiny, as soon as video was introduced many years ago, there's no doubt that it just continues to be enhanced, and our officials need to be accountable, just like players are, and that's why most, if not all, of the conferences make a significant investment in their video resources to train their officials and to ensure that those officials are into video week in and week out, to minimize errors, to minimize inconsistencies, and help everyone come along in terms of development. What we also have to be conscious of and remember is that when you have humans involved in judgment, and many of our rules surround judgment, not all of our rules are black and white. There's going to be an agree and a disagree. And hopefully we can narrow that gap in terms of disagree. But at the end of the day, when there's judgment applied, as long as we're staying within the parameter of the rules as officials, or we're not making egregious errors or misinterpretations. Judgment you can discuss, okay, but you can't misinterpret a rule. That's a big error from an officiating perspective.
I want to ask you about what you see from your officials in terms of the biggest challenges. I get to see a lot of hockey, whether it's live and games that I'm broadcasting or just at home. Like on last Saturday night, I think I watched 7 different games in 4 different leagues last week. And, I look at it and, from my perspective, I see lots of issues with some of the big types of hits, where players aren't very responsible for what they're doing. And that thus, we get some controversial major penalties, those types of things. And then I see some issues with diving and embellishment. There are things I think we've been talking now about for more than a decade, both of them. But have you seen a rise in some of these things? And what do you see as some of the biggest issues?
Well, you're spot on with what you mentioned about big hits. We have to remember that contact is part of our game. Contact has to be fair and legal. And sometimes the hitter goes astray and makes an illegal hit that we need to make sure that we enforce properly. I think for the officials at all levels, major penalties, hitting from behind, contact to the head are probably the biggest challenge, and not to mention video replay along goalkeeper interference. Those are probably the more challenging of the situations that the officials have to deal with. Trips and hooks and things like that. That's going to go on every game, and you're going to agree on some, and you're not going to agree on others. But player safety has to stay at the top of mind for all officials and all players and coaches and administrators. And so, given the physicality, the speed of the game, I would probably say those are the areas right now that are very challenging. Not to mention the embellishment, and where it becomes difficult is especially along the boards when guys give their bodies up. I'll call it that way, where they know a hit is coming, and they just kind of melt to the boards, and the contact is there. The hitter is already committed. He's in a short distance. And then there's contact into the boards. Under a rule, contact directly from behind, officials now have discretion. They can either call it a major penalty or escalate it to a game misconduct or disqualification, depending upon the severity. But there are, when the rule is rolled out to allow discretion on applying a major penalty, it was for things like the simultaneous to the moment that there's contact, body position changes. In other words, they turn, okay, or they lower their body position on an open ice hit. And then the hitter is already committed, and now the body position changes. And so, there's contact directly to the head, or the main point of contact being the head, or the player turns and then he still gets hit into the boards. So, awareness, and I say this a lot when I talk to you guys. I mean, we have to have that mutual cooperation across all fronts. And what I mean by that is the referees got to do their job enforcing player safety, but the players, the coaches, and administrators have to support those kinds of decisions that are made by officials to penalize appropriately and to train and teach players to make sure when they approach players from behind, it's in a responsible way. When there's contact to be made on an unsuspecting player, they're aware of what actions they need to take to ensure that they don't hit the player in the head. So, all those things are multiple discussions that have taken place over years. And I think as long as there's contact, obviously, we're going to see hits that go astray for sure.
You just mentioned one of your challenges, goalie interference on the review. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. It seems like one of the most misunderstood penalties, especially by fans. And you'll hear fans say, I don't understand what goalie interference is. And I know the college rule differs a little bit from the NHL rule, but what is it that makes the goaltender interference rules so difficult for people to understand when they're watching a game?
Well, one thing in particular, and this is what someone mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago, is that they didn't realize that there didn't have to be a penalty enforced in order for it to be goalkeeper interference. In other words, if you have contact with the goalkeeper, and there's physical contact and it doesn't allow him to play the position, that you don't necessarily have to have a penalty for that, but you can disallow the goal. So that was something that was really misunderstood. And then the other areas are really, there's three primary areas of Rule 73, which is our goalkeeper interference rule. It's the rights of the goalkeeper, which is basically to protect him in the blue and allow him to play the position. The rights of the attacking player when they stay outside of the blue and allow them to score goals. And then the role of the referee in that situation to properly manage and apply judgment to those situations. So that's really, really important in terms of remembering. But as I'm going through all of these areas right now, all three require judgment, right? So we don't have a black and white rule. And did an interesting exercise last year with our coaches at our spring meetings in Naples, and I put six goalie interference plays, and these weren't easy ones. These weren't clips that the neighbor kids could figure out what the decision was. Right? These were clips that were challenging. I put 6 contact to the head and 6 hitting from behind, and we went through each one, and I wanted them to take a look at it from an exercise perspective of if they were officiating the game and they had this available to them, these angles available to them, how would they roll? And the conclusion was in that exercise is that 100% of each of the plays, no one could agree to unanimous. So there's opinions, there's judgment. Some are more, again, I guess, conclusive, put it that way, Jim. But others, when you apply judgment, what was it? Was it a significant contact? Did it not allow the goalie to play the position? Did he have a chance to get back into his position? All those things enter in the mind as you're reviewing this, particularly in the fact that if there's an initial on-ice call, Jim, in order for the referees to revisit that play, they can't do it from a discretionary perspective. It has to be challenged under rule.
More with Steve Piotrowski in just a moment. This podcast is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th, 2024, at XL Energy Center in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Where are my hockey fans at? Present! Welcome to Fandom 101. It's NCAA Ice Hockey Championship time, when the hottest teams in the country face off under one roof. Be there to see your squad hoist the ultimate trophy overhead. The NCAA Men's Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th in St. Paul, Minnesota. Attendance is encouraged. Passion is mandatory. Buy your seats today at ncaa.com/mfrozen4. Class dismissed.
We're back talking rules and officiating with Steve Piotrowski from the Big Ten. Steve, I wanted to pick up on that, on what can be called or what can be initiated as a video review by officials, what needs to be challenged. I hear so many people unsure about how that works, and even coaches saying, why should I have to challenge this to see that something happened?
Well, that's the great debate. I mean, we want the games to have flow and to move forward, but when we stop the games as we had when the video review rule was first rolled out, the coaches were unhappy with as many times as officials were going to review, because it was killing the full flow and momentum of the game and sucking the life out of the game. So, along this journey of video review and the elements that provide and allow for discretion to the referees, the rules committee pushed more away from passing things on to the coaches, allowing the referees to make the decision at the ice level. And if the coaches felt that they wanted to revisit things because, they have video capabilities, they have a video coach that's watching the game and can communicate down to the bench to say, this is probably a good thing that we need to challenge. They're allowed to do so. So I'm not sure. That's probably, now that you mentioned that, Ed, it's probably one of the very big areas in the spring meetings and that the rules committee will look at in terms of how to change, how to make it more comprehensive, what things possibly could change to make it more understandable. And potentially, there's been some discussions in the past of no longer allowing a timeout. If you want to challenge things like the NHL, you challenge, if you don't overturn it and you're unsuccessful, then you're going to get a penalty for delay of game.
I'm sure with coaches, they have to really weigh that into consideration too. Usually when I've been seeing challenges, it's either something to do with a goal or something where they think something happened during the play where there was head contact, or some of those things that may not be as easy for an official to see real time, like a kneeing or a slew footing away from the play. But there is a hesitation there even still. The timeout seems easy to give up, but then when you start thinking about penalties, a minor penalty, a bench minor for the challenge if you lose it, how do you weigh trying to reduce the number of calls that go to video as opposed to giving the opportunity to catch something that's behind the play? I'm sure that's going to be part of the discussion.
Well, I think when video review was rolled out, the intention was to correct an egregious error, right? It wasn't intended to re-officiate every play. And I think that's where everyone's getting lost and caught up. There's going to be calls where you're going to agree and disagree with. But if we start to use video and put the expectation to say, hey, anything that there's being called where we now want to take a look at, that's going to be impossible to officiate the game. And at the same time, the look that the official has normally, if you really look statistically at what's the success rate of overturning calls from a challenge from a coach, it's not very good. It's under 30% in most cases. So I understand from their perspective that the timeout is important as we get later into the game, but the trade-off again is to create an expectation for the referees. Any call that is in certain areas, they want the official to review any calls around the goal. Because if I look at our statistics from our conference year over year, the most challenged and most reviewed area has been the potential for major penalty and injection of the student athlete. Secondary to that is, did the puck completely cross the line? And thirdly to that is goalkeeper interference. So you can see where those are coming from. And if we have that and not only require, if it's required or we only allow discretion, and set the expectation to have the officials do it, got a lot of muddy down games.
We've talked before about the change a couple of years ago on faceoffs, going to warnings instead of throwing the player out of the circle. Is that something that's possible to come up on rule changes? And let me just insert here, I've seen quite a few women's games this year. The ladies line up and the puck gets dropped. In the men's games, the guys are cheating, moving, wiggling, giving the linesmen all kinds of fits. The linesmen are trying to get people set. I mean, it seems to me, this is just off the top of my head watching it, that it's a no-win situation for teams, for linesmen, and all the way things are going right now. Or is that going to get looked at, do you think?
100% it will be looked at. And I think the groundswell support is to make a change and go back to ejecting the center. And here's the major reason, is there's no consequence under the current rule. You can warn a player, you can warn the center, and again, removing the center now becomes a strategic situation for the teams, because if you have your center who's good on your draws and now he's being removed because players encroached or he came through the faceoff circle, there's more consequence to that and has more teeth versus what we're doing now. Because I've talked to centers across the country, and they say, well, if I know I'm just going to get a warning and I cheat 50% of the time, and I only get a warning 50%, the other 50% they quick drop, there's a chance for me to be more successful on that. So I think we've got to empower the linesmen, empower the game, and allow a consequence to occur by removing the center. So I do think that the Rules Committee will seriously discuss that. And I know it's supported at all levels to make a change back to removing the center on a violation. And then the second violation, the same faceoff then would be a penalty.
And that's pretty significant for even how the game is played. Who do you put out on the ice in a defensive zone draw late in the game to make sure that you've got maybe your second best centerman out there in case the first guy gets tossed? We end up going back to some of that strategy for teams too. One last thing I wanted to ask you about, is there anything else out there rule change wise that maybe we're missing or we haven't seen that's going to come up?
There's going to be some discussion, I believe, on eliminating the minor penalty was when a goal is scored on the delay. That's the rule we've had in place for a number of years, which can be a double whammy. I've seen games turned around where you had a 1-goal game. There's a delayed penalty. They pull the goalkeeper for the extra attacker. They score a goal to tie the game, and now they go on the power play, and they end up winning that power play because under our rule, the minor penalty on the delay has to be served whether you score or not. So I think there's going to be some discussions on that. I think there's some discussions on high stick of the puck and just kind of clarifying and redefining. I think this is probably going to align with the NHL. Like our rule is 4 feet. A play that doesn't involve a goal, a non-goal situation, it's 4 feet. But if you have a 6'5" guy, it's under his shoulder. That's not it's not 4 feet for him, right? So how it will be defined basically is any kind of goal situation still be crossbar. The stick has to be where the puck contacts the stick. It has to be below the crossbar. And then any open ice plays involving non-goal situations would be shoulder. And that's how the NHL does it. I know the CCHA right now had filed a waiver at the beginning of the season to experiment with it in their league play. And so they'll bring some data back to the rules committee so that you can see that changed. Another one that's being discussed is the potential for eliminating in the 5-minute overtime the timeout availability. When you're in tournament play and NCAA play, you get a timeout per each overtime segment, and that goes back to that North Dakota Minnesota Duluth game that went multiple overtimes, and then they only had one for that entire sequence. So there's some discussion about that. There's also there'll probably be some discussions, and I'm speculating this now. There'll probably be some discussions on throw protection in follow up to the tragic death of the former Minnesota Duluth player in the Britain League. So there are just some of the things that probably will take place. I know, again, the video replay rule 93 will be discussed in great detail.
Before we let you go, this is almost like the all-star season for your officials. You're trying to pick the best to referee the Big Ten tournament, and then from there it's picking the best of those that'll go on to the NCAA regionals and Frozen Four. How thrilling is it to be able to reward some of the great officiating on the ice with the big assignments in the postseason?
It's very exciting, and that's what every official in our league aspires to. Just like the players, they want to be standing with the last game every season. They work hard for that. Sometimes it works out for guys, and sometimes it doesn't. Everyone starts in our conference and most of the other conferences just like this. Start with a clean slate, but whether you went all the way through the season before. If you don't perform throughout the season, you're probably not going to advance. And so in many cases, it becomes very close, becomes little things that do make the difference. But rewarding an official and telling them the great news, and then allowing that recommendation to be passed on for those particular officials to the NCAA, and then allow them to make their picks for the NCAA tournament. It's very thrilling for those guys to receive a call from the NCAA announcing their selection to work and continue to work through the tournament.
Well, Steve, we always appreciate you joining us on this program, and the candor with which you speak about officiating rules and all of those things. You've got the certain long list of experiences that you've gone through. I guess like us, it just means we're all old, but we appreciate everything you do and joining us. And hopefully we can talk again out in St. Paul during the Frozen Four.
Yeah, no, of course. And I'm happy to connect with you guys, and likewise to the accolades to you guys. You guys do a really great job, promoting college hockey, giving the fans a full gamut of everything that's involving the game, including the teams and officiating, which is always curious for people to understand what's involved. But thank you for allowing me to be on the program.
That's Steve Piotrowski from the Big Ten, supervises the officials in that league and has been part of rules and officiating around college hockey for years. Jim, so much discussed there in such a short amount of time. What's your major takeaway from the whole thing?
Well, I think the thing I take away is maybe when he gets into what will be considered for rule changes this year, it feels like what is new or what is old will be new again. A lot of rules were changed in the last decade, and it sounds like a lot of them that there's a desire to bring it back. The face-off rule and not throwing out the center. That's something I know has been discussed a lot for the last 4 years. The double jeopardy on the power play, where you could score a goal during a delayed penalty call and still get the power play. It looks like that'll align back with the NHL rule. And the high stick, the high stick at one point was always shoulder for the regular puck, crossbar for the goal. Now it looks like we're going to go back to that after, it had gone to the 4-foot rule throughout the entire ice. So I think that, it's interesting. I feel like college has always done a good job with trying to experiment with some rules and they implement rules. But then once you actually go into the gameplay situations, I think that people realize that some of the NHL rule book's a pretty good book. And if it might be sometimes just easier to align with the NHL book as much as possible. I know that there are some things that, aren't exactly aligned, but you heard him even talk about, we've talked the college game, because you don't have the same technology like iPads on the bench, you want to give that, one option to challenge a play and not face a penalty. You can just lose your timeout for that first challenge. And it sounds like they want to even take that and align that with the NHL rule. So we'll see where things go and how many of these rules might get changed or changed back. But it does feel like what is coming up for maybe next year is what we've already seen in the past.
Video continues to be something that needs to be refined and massaged and explained and worked on quite a bit. There's so many aspects of it, from the training of the off-ice officials to coaches understanding what they should and shouldn't challenge. And, you brought up video coaches seeing something and maybe saying, yeah, this is something we need to challenge. But even those coaches are not going to see a half a dozen views of it, and they may not get the camera angle that leads them to understand whether they can challenge or not. It's still a fuzzy area that probably will never be really nailed down the way everybody would like.
Then that's correct. And the one thing I will just say is the technology from building to building being so different. I'm talking about the cameras and the number of camera angles. If you're in a building, I can just speak from Hockey East, where I broadcast in almost every building. You can go to Boston College. You have the highest definition cameras possible. That these are the same things that align with what ESPN would use in a broadcast. And then you can go to another school in the league, and they had good cameras 10 years ago, but the technology keeps getting better. So the view is not as good. So you can't, get into some minutia areas. But again, maybe you don't need to. Going back to what Pi said, video review was always put in process to fix egregious mistakes. You're not trying to dissect a fly. You're trying to make sure that you don't miss the big penalty. You don't miss, goaltender interference. You don't, call a goal that never went in the net or something like that, didn't cross the goal line. So I think those are really the areas. I think we've gotten to a point, even in the NHL, and because the cameras are so good in some buildings, you've gotten to a point that you do almost want to re-officiate the game with video review. That's what slows things down. So I think it's interesting to hear Steve talk about that and recognize that is one of the biggest issues is the overuse of video review.
The one thing I didn't ask him about that I want to give him kudos for and wish every league did is mic up the officials so you understand what is being looked at, what the call was, what the decision was, and so forth. I think that adds a lot to the game for fans and probably coaches and everybody else too.
That needs to be mandated. Every single one of the Division I programs, men's and women's, should have that. It just makes it easier for the fans. If you're going to attend a game, it's easier to be communicated with. And that lack of communication that still, I believe, more than half the leagues don't have. Big Ten, I know, has it. And I know the NCAC has it. I know Hockey East does not. I don't believe Atlantic does. I don't believe ECAC does. And I don't believe the CCHA does. I don't know even about some of the independent schools out there. But that's an investment that every school should be required to make, because it would make the fan experience better. And it would take away so much confusion on what is being looked at during video review.
Well, with that, we'll wrap this edition of USCHO Spotlight. This podcast has been sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at XL Energy Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. Visit ncaa.com/mfrozen4 to get your tickets today. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Spotlight.